What's going on, everybody? This is Randall Barnes, the founder of HBCU Pulse and host of HBCU Pulse Radio, back. And, we're talking FAMU not making the FCS playoffs, and specifically if Albany State is truly to blame for FAMU not making it. I got my guy, D2 HBCU football guy, also known as Tuskegee Historian on TikTok. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
Man, I'm good, man. But I just I wanted to do this show because Thanksgiving break. I'm supposed to be on break, and I'm wearing this FAMU hoodie right now. If you listen to the audio, because man, I'm perplexed at the fact that number one, FAMU didn't make the playoffs after they made it last year. But a lot of people are blaming Albany State specifically as the reason why their strength of schedule wasn't high. And we're going to get more into the Albany State point in a second. Let's go on and hop into it. What are your thoughts on FAMU not making the FCS playoffs this year after making it last year?
Okay, so I'm about to make a lot of people mad, but I'm a Tuskegee guy, so I don't care about making FAMU people mad. FAMU has nobody to blame but themselves. Before they put the blame on anybody else, because had they accomplished their goal, and their goal being in the SWAC is a celebration bowl. And the elephant in the room is, had you beaten Jackson State, you'll be having a different conversation. So you lined up and you got embarrassed. First game of the year. Your coach says it was the worst coaching job he had ever done. And it was. So everything lied in their hand. Their fate was in their hand. All right. So I guess deeper into the conversation, after they accept the fact, because a lot of people that I hear talking and whining, in my opinion, they are people who maybe unconsciously have accepted the fact that as long as Dion is at Jackson State, they're just going to keep coming up second place. Because that's what it seems as of now. They're just a second place team. Now, instead of being mad with Albany State, maybe they should look into their conference and say, since we've added, these new schools, maybe we should get rid of the East and West division. Maybe it's time to talk restructuring how the SWAC determines who goes to the SWAC championship, which is what the SIC has done, going to an 8-game schedule coming to this year. Because if it was the two best teams, clearly the two best teams are Jackson State and FAMU, and they should be playing for a SWAC title. So they put a lot of blame in places that they shouldn't put blame in, and the blame should be first for them not accomplishing their goals, and second, maybe how their conference is set up.
And that makes sense. And, I'm not going to be as demonstrative. I do have this FAMU hoodie on, but I do understand where you're coming from, because at a certain point you have to handle business, and that's what sports is about. You have to handle business. FAMU had an amazing year, but that Jackson State loss, I believe it did elude them, because we all sort of knew that Jackson State was going to win out, and that was the game that was going to determine the SWAC championship. But let's talk about this, and let's bring Albany State into the discussion. Of course, you're a Tuskegee alum, so you've seen a lot of Albany Tuskegee battles. I'm a Fort Valley alum, so I've seen a lot between Fort Valley and Albany, and I ride for Albany because that's our people. All right, but one thing I didn't like for real is that Albany State was being brought up in this conversation of why FAMU didn't make the playoffs. So, do you think that is right for FAMU supporters and the HBCU community that's invested in HBCU sports to blame FAMU not making the FCS playoffs on them scheduling Albany State on September the 10th? They call that first home game the Jake Gaither Classic. Do you believe it's Albany State's fault?
So I think that's a perspective thing, and because I have so many FAMU people, and actually one of my mentors is a FAMU grad, I'm really hard on FAMU, and I'm going to be hard on them again in this part. If Albany State calls them, it's because, and they didn't like when I said this early on in the season, it's because they struggled with Albany State. You didn't, as the second best team in the SWAC, and where the SWAC was supposed to be, this new age of talent that's supposed to be in the SWAC. You look at all those SWAC SIC battles, they were all struggles. Nobody just dominated. You talking about a 1 in 9 miles could have almost beaten Alabama State with their third or fourth string quarterback. Okay. FAMU struggled with Albany State. Had it not been for two costly turnovers, 7 minutes into the second quarter, Albany State would have went into the half leading, would have went into halftime leading Fort Valley. They so there's 17 points. I think for FAMU only scored one offensive touchdown, if I'm not mistaken. Um, they settled for 2 field goals in the second half. You struggled with a team that wasn't even the second best in their own conference. Albany State was not better than Fort Valley. They were not better than Benedict. Okay, now we can argue whether or not they were better than Tuskegee or not, but they were either the third or the fourth best team in the conference, and you struggled with them, and this is your champion. So blame Albany State if you want to, blame your play. Because had you gone in there and put up 40, 50, 60 points on there, the committee might look a little bit different and say, well, Albany State is a quality D2 opponent, and this FCS team soundly beat them, but they didn't. So once again, it's on how they play.
So I think you brought up a great point about the sound D2 opponent. So, it's another question that I want to ask about the historical precedent because you're really big into history. But the part that really was getting to me as a SWAC guy, as someone that's seen Fort Valley in 2016 win a SWAC championship, someone that's seen Tuskegee dominate, someone that's seen Albany State and Miles College dominate, I don't like how Albany State was limited to this D2 team that they played that messed up the strength of schedule. When Albany State came into that game, the reigning SWAC champions, they came into that game not allowing a touchdown from any of their SWAC opponents. Like, they came in a really great team, ended the year 7-3 the year before, and then everyone thought, and you said it before on our Spaces talks, that you thought it was going to be Lane versus Albany State in the SWAC championship. So the predicted order of finish was Albany State was going to be number one and go back to back as the champion. So you're not playing. I'm not dissing VUL, but you're not playing Virginia University at Lynchburg. You're not even playing a Fort Valley team that was 5-5 last year. You're playing a conference champion. So that was what I didn't understand. So, you said the thing about, the strong D2 opponent. So do you think that would have played a factor into it if they did decisively beat a SWAC champion, Albany State University?
Yes, I think that the committee would have looked at it differently. But also, I think the narrative is getting carried. That narrative is getting carried because I know that the chairman said that it was the Albany State game they looked at. But really no detail with that, because I'm saying he could be saying that because look how you guys struggled with this D2 team. Not necessarily that you played this D2 team, okay? Because if you go back and look at some of their past schedules with their FCS championship, like, for me, the FAMU people, they had gotten used to beating up on Fort Valley because I think they played Fort Valley a couple years in a row, and that's their mindset. But they tend to forget that we just whooped their butts in Mobile, I think 2017. Okay, so they're not some unbeatable FCS program. And when Albany State went to town, I saw a lot of some of the talk that was on there, but I'm saying, Albany State has a real opportunity to beat them, but it just shows, like, people who don't follow D2 HBCUs and don't understand that history, that they're not all blowouts. Like, you make them bring Clark in and blow Clark out. But if you bring in a Miles or Tuskegee or Albany State or even a Fort Valley on these good years, you're going to be in. And, what is Alcorn? Alcorn lost like 3 straight years to Fort Valley and decided they would never put them boys back on the schedule. Like, for me, FAMU people are looking for a cop-out, and it goes back to one thing. Win your games, okay? Had you beat and blew Albany State out, I believe you would be in the playoffs. That's my honest belief, because you would have showed that you were dominant. But you were not dominant. I know they like to say Albany State scored with like a couple of minutes left in the game when the backups was in. If your backups were in with 2 minutes some left in the game in like a 10-point game, please. Maybe that speaks to something else, okay? Because that's not Fort Valley, okay? And then if you get the right SIC school, because Albany State is just not built like that, You get a Benedict like that on this year, or even a Tuskegee on this year who has that explosive offense. Yeah, you would have been beat down there in Bray. You just caught a team that's there. So they should be happy that they won. They shouldn't be blaming Albany. They should just be happy that they won that game and that they have a 9-2 season and not 8-3, because they were very close to being an 8-3 team. Okay, and then you're not getting into the playoffs then. So it just, to me, yesterday it really irked my nerve. Just all this, because I have a really firm position on HBCUs in the playoff. Stop whining, and when you get the opportunity, beat them. And that just does not happen a lot of the time. FAMU went to the playoffs last year. They got boat raced. Okay. Then you want to get in the playoffs again this year. You played the game really tight against Jackson State last year. This year, you just, I don't know, you don't show up. You don't get off the bus. You get down there, you get embarrassed. The committee also sees that when Jackson State played Campbell, a mediocre FCS team at best, and you see the comparison to those games, and it's like, all right, this is what happened to you. But this is another FCS team. So it's like, when we had an opportunity to go out and win, we should win. Okay. I've said this on our SIAC talk, even with SIAC schools. We should really just be able to out-athlete some of these D2 schools. My school is not exempt. I was really hard on them. That 2017 season, we beat Jackson State and we beat Florida. We went up and we get blanked like 67-0 to some D2 school called Findlay in Findlay, Ohio. And then we get left. We win the SIAC, and we get left out of the playoff. And everybody was like, "Oh, they robbed us." No, you don't get to go on the road to some school in Ohio that we've never heard of, being Tuskegee, the brand that we have, and get blanked 67-0 and think you belong in the playoffs. Like, no, line up and beat those guys, because those guys are not out recruiting you. If you're getting out recruited by a Finley, we should just have better athletes, because how can they get our guys to come there and not come there? So I have no excuses. Line up, beat them. If the SWAC schools were beating FCS opponents, we wouldn't be having this discussion, but they're not. Okay. And so if they want to end this discussion, beat them.
Hey, you telling the truth. And I want to just say that, like, in 2017, Tuskegee beat Alabama State 14-6. You beat Jackson State 33-7. Of course, you won the side championship over Fort Valley. That still is something like, dang, man, because that was an ugly game. It was an ugly game, but y'all beat us. But you did lose to Findlay. You lost to Findlay 0-61. I've never heard of Findlay in my life. I'm a wrestling fan. When you said Findlay, I thought about Finlay and Hornswoggle in the WWE. That's what I thought about. Findlay. I'm like, y'all play Findlay? You know, I was like, like, what the world? So that makes perfect sense. Because like you know, I think that's one thing I always talk about with HBCUs, and I always joke about, is that we play great against each other, but when we play these white schools, we fold. And that's not just, you know, like the FCS and the SWAC, man, like that's D2 as well. You know what I'm saying? And then that scares me, you know, when I look at like what happened with Fayetteville State this weekend versus Delta State, what happened with Union versus Wingate, you know, this weekend. What makes me scared for Wingate versus Benedict, because it's like we play dominant in our conference, but we play these white schools, and it's almost like we get scared, even if these white schools are not as good as us or don't have the talent of us. But I want to bring up the historical point that you brought up. So is there a historical precedent for FCS schools playing D2 schools, and not just HBCUs? Like they might play Delta State, like Jack State played Delta State last year. So like, is there a penalty of like these FCS schools, HBCUs and non-HBCUs playing D2 opponents and beating them narrowly? Do they still make the playoffs? Like, is there a precedent that's there? Or are we just saying, hey, it's Albany State's fault because they're D2, they're the smaller HBCU, and you know that they're the reason why?
So let me talk about the reverse to that first. D2 schools are penalized for playing up to FCS schools, because those games just don't count at all. It's not in the criteria. So you take, I believe it's the 2016 year for Tuskegee. We also played two FCS schools that year, and we only played 7 D2 games because you have to play 8 D2 games in order to get consideration for the playoffs. So we dropped one. I think it was like 7-1. We needed another game, so we contacted Virginia State, and Virginia State came in, beat us real bad. Okay, don't get like we invited them, and they came and beat us. But then we had a little success in the playoffs that year. But we needed that game. So for D2s, it's a penalty because we already only play a 10-game schedule. So we're already behind the curve. But we see the financial benefit of playing them. Of playing those games because a lot of times they are old rivalries. So you get when you get years of a Tuskegee and Alabama A&M or Tuskegee and Alabama State, is those old rivalries. We used to be in the same conference, and so there are fan bases who like that. Sects in the fan base who just really like those games, and that's what they want to see. So I think HBCUs they get caught in like a little quagmire where it is we gotta appease our fan bases, and we want to kind of I don't want to say advance because I don't find value in those spaces. I just want to be honest. I just rather if we go in those spaces, we should win. So they're kind of stuck between what do they want to do, and HBCU football is more diverse. Our conferences are more diverse than people realize. So you take like the SIC, we have Spring Hill. You take CIAA with Shawan. That problem just doesn't exist with the black schools in our conference. Spring Hill in volleyball, I think they're on like a 140 game win streak against the SIC. But they get knocked out first round of the playoffs every year. They get not like they go through like they only lost. I think they lost one set this year, but they get to the playoffs and get beat in 3 straight sets. Like so, it just does. It's just not. There's something not connecting. In our conferences, there's a mentality problem in our conferences. I don't think that these schools have better athletes than us in your perspective, levels. I don't see that. So when it comes down to it's their fault or they fault. No, we have to address the monkey in the room. We got to look at how are we getting beat. Okay, like I don't care about. I know a couple people said that you got to get representation on the committee. Okay, I hear that. I do respect that position. That's true too. But that goes back to the way your conference is set up. Your conference has chosen to do this, this, and this, and put you at this disadvantage. Okay, so disadvantage or advantage depends on how you look at it. Because some people see the $1 million payment as that's the high advantage, but we just have to address the big monkey in the room. And I don't know if where this was supposed to lead to. It's what Dion said. It's one of the truer things that he said in his analysis of HBCU football. We lose in the trenches. We lose in the trenches. That's where we get beat. I don't know a lot about FCS playoff football because I don't watch it because I'm doing that time watching D2 football. In D2 football, how even the concept of how we use our tight ends. Okay, we get beat in trench play. Like that's just end of story. We get beat there. And I think that we have to put a bigger emphasis on what our trench play is, and then you'll see this conversation go away. But right now that conversation not gonna go away because we're begging them to let us in, but then they let us in and we're not competitive.
And I think that that's a great point because when Deion Sanders at SWAC Media Day was asked if they would ever play Alabama State, he said, let me get the trenches together first. Let me get the big boys in the middle up front because he feels as if HBCUs have skill players. You have your Shedeur Sanders of the world. You have your Travis Hunters. You're on offense and defense. But the trench play on offense and defense is what destroys us because like they come after our guys, our quarterbacks, our running backs, and then like they're coming after us on offense. So you're saying something that's 1,000% true. So I want to put a bow on it on this one, because here's what I think is going to happen. I think that based off of FAMU not making the FCS playoffs, I honestly believe that we could possibly see, unless there's contracts in place, we could possibly see FCS, HBCUs not schedule D2 schools anymore if they want to make the playoffs. Because let's not forget that North Carolina A&T, they scheduled Edward Waters, and they were trying to make the playoffs, and they lost to Gardner-Webb. They should have beaten Gardner-Webb. We all thought they would beat Gardner-Webb. They beaten them before, but they did schedule Edward Waters. So it's like, how I look at it is these FCS HBCUs are not going to schedule Fort Valley anymore. They're not going to schedule Albany State anymore. They're not going to schedule Benedict. And I think the big reason why is not because we're close to beating them. It's because, now we're seeing there's no value if we want to play in this playoff system that I personally believe, and I've said this before, I really think there's no benefit. And I'm starting to really more so affirm now that I see what's going on that the Celebration Bowl is a great alternative to the playoffs. And I honestly do believe, and Off Script has said this before, there have been others that have said this, there needs to be like a championship system that's with the Celebration Bowl that puts FCS teams in. And I believe we should bring the Pioneer Bowl back, but that's a conversation for the SWAC football space we can have. But do you think that there's going to be a precedent where FCS HBCUs are not going to schedule D2 HBCUs, even the good ones, anymore?
Albany State hadn't played FCS HBCU. I'm not sure who was the last one they played, but like we talked about, in 1993 was the last time they played Florida A&M. Albany State was one of those schools that went all out to be competitive in the D2 playoffs. Under Mike White. When Mike White was there, they had a couple of opportunities, had a couple of really good teams that should have made runs, were undefeated, and then go and get knocked out first round. Okay. I think the precedent is already set because it depends on your administration. So you look at the SIAC East. The SIAC East really doesn't rely on FCS competition. They play a lot of GSC schools, and like Benedict played CIAA school. It's the West schools that kind of play, have these relationships with these SWAC schools to get it. I think it also is going to depend on the SWAC administration. I think there are a lot of people who may think that Dion won't stay at Jackson State forever. So I don't know if they're looking at long term to get rid of things that are going to be beneficial. It would never be beneficial for Alabama State to stop playing Tuskegee or Miles. Never. Because one, they play the Turkey Day Classic, so they can't get in there anyway. Okay, so, they're exempt, we're exempt when you play in that game. So it's not beneficial for them to stop. I think I would like to see Tuskegee and Alabama A&M start back up, because since Tuskegee plays Alabama State now, we can't go to the playoffs, so we might as well make some money in the meantime. Like, there's no reason that Tuskegee, Alabama, and them shouldn't be on each other's schedule. I think it will probably hurt maybe a program like Miles, like Lane, who doesn't have a tradition with these schools, like a historic tradition where you get 40, 50,000 people out, to a game. I think schools might think twice about scheduling them, because even I remember there was a debacle when they thought the schedule came out and Lane was on Jackson State's schedule. Like earlier on in summer, that kind of came out and people were up in arms about it. So I think it will impact teams like Lane, who depend, who needs those paydays to continue what they have going on. So I think it will put a strain on them. Maybe FAMU doesn't play D2s anymore. I mean, they would throw one on the schedule, but I don't really, it is what it is for that. If they do or not, it just depends on where they go, where their mindset is. But for the schools that make money off those games and not just scheduling them for, easy W or just to fill the schedule out, I think they may think twice, but you'll still see some SIAC D2 matchups.
I feel it because like you said, I think that it goes to tradition, like the Turkey Day Classic for Tuskegee and Alabama State, or Miles and Alabama State. That's right. A tradition, and you have these different games, these classics, these matchups. That's tradition. And Alabama A&M was in the SWAC and they dominated.
Now let me interrupt there and make the Alabama and them folks mad. Okay, they didn't leave on no dominating note. Okay, they didn't even win the year they got out of there. Okay, so I don't, Now I'm not the big Alabama A&M fan. Okay, now if it's one school they can call me a hater of, it's Alabama A&M, and I don't care for the Bulldogs. However, um, I've said this on my platform before. I felt like when Alabama A&M left, Tuskegee should have left. We should have left before Alabama A&M left when the SIC was about to crumble this one particular year. But because we are a charter member, we chose to hang around. Okay, and I think that our brand suffers from being still in to be D2 and still be SIC. That's just my honest opinion. Because if you look at attendance, you look at who the fan base want to see, who we're intrigued by, it's our old rivals. Like the FAMU game, we played FAMU in Mobile that particular year. The whole week they were talking about it was going to storm. And I remember the promoter saying they only did 10,000 tickets because they just were like, it was going to storm. They didn't think. Well, they put the tickets on sale. They come back the next day and say, hey, we got to push this out to 20,000 because those tickets sold. Because it was that old rivalry. Tuskegee has a chant called Damn You FAMU that hadn't been used in years. I actually have a shirt. I don't know where it is. I need to find it. So, like, that's a historic rival. Tuskegee has gone in that year that and well, here is a historic precedent. FAMU was going after a national title this one particular year, and they played Tuskegee. I have to put on my page the exact year. They bring Tuskegee in for homecoming. Tuskegee's on one of these losing streaks, and they shock FAMU at home. And FAMU hopes for going to the playoffs were ruined on their homecoming by this this Tuskegee team. I was it 50? I can't remember the year. I got some stuff on it, but so yeah, those type of rivalries, those are big. Um, you might never see a Tuskegee FAMU in the next 10, 15 years, probably, unless we move up. That is the talk. But you'll forever see that Tuskegee Alabama State and the Tuskegee Alabama A&M. That's not going anywhere.
I honestly think that there's value in like keeping the rivalries. That's why I think that for money, and also I think for just HBCU football and the history of it. I think that us keeping those traditional matchups and keeping and preserving our history is important, and I believe personally it's more important than playing up two white conferences. I understand the value of it. I understand the value of getting your pro prospects, more playing time against what is considered quote unquote tougher opponents. And I also do understand what that TV time, quote unquote, because ESPN is real, quote unquote, will do for you. But I just believe that there's value in having these matchups where you're playing HBCUs. I'm sorry. I just believe that it is value because there were some Jackson State games where they were dominant, but it was games like the Alcorn game, like the Alabama State game, like the Alabama A&M game where they fought, and it was a really good, compelling game. Albany State, Savannah State was compelling. Fort Valley, Savannah State, I was there. It wasn't streamed. That was compelling. Albany State versus Fort Valley this year was compelling. So you have these HBCU matchups that are just simply good matchups. I just don't think to play up to white conferences where you still not going to make the playoffs, you still not going to win the championship. I just don't think that makes sense. But I honestly believe that what we're going to see is a bit of a precedent where we might not see next year FAMU unless it's a contract in place. I honestly believe that they're now, if they want to make the playoffs, I believe that they are going to, for that first game, they're going to find a Kennesaw. They're going to find maybe a Valdosta State. They're going to find at least a school in Georgia, maybe Mercer. I think Mercer would come down. Like, I think they're going to find somebody to play that's not Fort Valley, that's not Albany State, that's not Benedict, that's not Tuskegee. I think they're going to now say, you know what? The fans are upset. Let me go find a Mercer for us to play, and then we'll see if we make the playoffs then.
So, I'm also going to play devil's advocate here just for a second. I 100% agree with your stance, like finding the value in those spaces. I want us to find value in those spaces by choice, not because we can't compete. I I like the concept of us keeping those rivalries. But the way people are framing the conversations as if we are running from, oh, because we can't do this, we come. No, I want you to find value in that space prior to. And if we do happen to go over there, I want you to beat the brakes off them, then come back over here and we have this family reunion. We talk about how we whooped them folks over there and now they want into our spaces. Okay. Um, when you see you mentioned Kennesaw State. Kennesaw State was one of those programs that, restart their football program and instantly became a semi-powerhouse. The same way with University of West Florida on the D2 level. And so I always think about schools that are starting back their programs or wanting to get into the playoffs. You guys are not using their model. Like within 2 years, West Florida was playing for a national championship in D2 football. You're not looking at what they're doing to be competitive in this. Like they just showed up. No historic tradition, none of that. They just showed up and started playing football. One, they're out recruiting you, okay, clearly. And you gotta be honest with yourself. Our schools have to have this self-evaluation to say, you know what, we have not been good stewards over what we have. We have HBCU culture. You're not telling me that a coach from Tuskegee and a coach from West Alabama can go after the same player and the coach from West Alabama wins. Okay. You're not telling me that. Because if they're winning, it's because we're not being good stewards and we're not good salesmen over what we have to offer. There's nothing that they can get in Livingston, Alabama that they can't get better and more from Tuskegee. So yes, I agree. Finding that value, but not from a space we're finding value because we're losing. Okay. We find value because we win it. And if we decide to come in there, play y'all and beat y'all, we'll beat y'all and then come back and won't play y'all anymore. So I don't like, because I think schools start to beat down on us from that perspective to say, oh, they don't play for a national championship. Like those are things that you ask. And one of the things that I was saying, ask recruits. I know like us as alums, we sit around, we talk about what we want to see. But let's ask the kids who are actually at the school, who are coming to school, who are working at the school. Who do y'all want to play? Do y'all want to play for a Celebration Bowl? Do y'all want to play for a national championship? How do you all feel? I think Tuskegee missed the mark when they went back to the Turkey Day Classic over the Labor Day Classic. The Turkey Day Classic does not include the students because they're going home. The Labor Day Classic, which if you look at the numbers at the Labor Day Classic were better than the last 15, 20 years of the Turkey Day Classic because it had gotten kind of stale and boring. The students were able to come revive. Albany State Tuskegee trended on Twitter for a whole week that first Labor Day Classic. Came back the next year, it was the same way. They were all exciting, close, game. The atmosphere was unmatched. So then you go back to the Turkey Day Classic, you kill it. And had you asked, because the new students, they're going to be the alumni that have to come to the game. As the old base is dying out, they're getting old, they don't travel anymore. You have to be able to replace. You got to be able to replace your fan base. And we're not doing that. So I think we have to have a collective conversation. It has to be a conversation where we're getting all the people who are interested in the future of our schools and what they have to say, So yeah, find that value, but find that value not in lieu of, but it's my choice. Like I'm actively choosing. I want to play my brother Tuskegee. I want to play my sister's school, Albany State. I think Tuskegee and Grambling, we have such a rich tradition together because of Booker T. Washington. Why don't we play every year? I mean, I know we play Hampton this year. There's no reason that Tuskegee and Hampton shouldn't be playing. Like, you talking about Booker T. Washington and Hampton raised over $10 million together in a year, okay? And you're talking about this 1905, I believe. Wait, they were raising that kind of money? Like, there is a historic tradition that our schools. And so, yes, we should embrace those historic traditions, but just embrace them, but still along the way, whoop them folks' butt.
But this was a great conversation. We got to do this again. We do this every week on our Twitter Spaces, the SWAC Talk. But let everybody know where they can find you on social media, because you got a lot of knowledge, man. Where can they find you on social media?
So on Twitter, I'm D2HBCU football. On TikTok, I'm Skiggy Historian. On Instagram, I'm Skiggy Historian. So either one of those pages. My TikTok is geared more towards Black history. Sometimes I talk a little sports on there, but my Twitter is designated where I talk about D2 football, more importantly, SIC football. And sometimes I do talk about a lot of history of like HBCUs that people didn't even know existed in their football program. So that's how you can find me.
Most definitely. And I want to say once again, for everybody, you can find us on Twitter and TikTok at the HBCU Pulse, on Instagram and YouTube, because YouTube has handles. That's at HBCU Pulse. And also you can check us out on HBCU League Pass Plus channel 201. That's HBCU Pulse channel. As you're waiting for the Benedict Wingate game to come on, turn on the 201. You got some good program. You're going to see some familiar faces on channel 201 on Saturday. I'm going to make sure of that. But man, thank you so much for coming on. And as always, for everybody, we'll see you on the other side.